Back in session, 6:18 p.m. We are returning from executive session in which we discussed a personnel investigation. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Since it is so nice out and nobody really wants to be here, I mean, everyone loves us, but other than that, I don't have any announcements, so I need a motion to adopt an agenda. Deanna is first, Tom is second, all in favor. 7 in favor, motion passes. Superintendent's report, sir.
Sure, so most of my report would be on budget. As you see on the screen, we have 3 budget-related things. Then we have a bus purchase resolution, this update on roadshow schedule, and the last presentation is just more for informational than to go through. The first 2 presentations, I'll go through relatively fast. The board has in its possession an internal summary of mid-year. Just so people know, so we go through the process of developing a budget. We start with our existing budget and try to project out what does it look like for the rest of this year. So we have some sense of where our opportunities for potential savings building forward, as well as where are pinch points in terms of cost escalation areas. So we're looking at current budget situation. So when you're looking at this, again, these are projections as of February for the most part. And we're anticipating, and we've been in this mode for a couple years now, of spending down quite a bit of the budget. Once upon a time, the sweet spot used to be around 97%. And as you see here now, we're almost 99% of what we anticipate to spend now. So as you budget tighter, you spend the majority of what you budget. So this also is a good thing, but also lends to the fact that each year things get tighter and tighter. And you're going to see some of that showing up when we do this year's budget. So again, I'm not going to necessarily walk through all the details. I just want to highlight that piece of it. The good thing is on the revenue side, we still see some positives when it comes to interest income, which is something we got to watch right now because the market space is so volatile that we have no idea what the potential will be next year. And so that's the reason why we were hesitant in the past to budget a lot of interest income because the market has been very volatile. And so it impacts interest income quite a bit for us in a delayed reaction, so to speak. So that's what that first presentation is. And again, the report from Kathy, I think, gives you a good sense of where we saw or where we think we're going to see some potential savings between now and the end of the year. A lot of it is staff turnover. As people retire, we backfill with a lower salary piece, and so a lot of that is that. But when you really think about spending, again, 99% of what you budget, that's pretty good when you look at it from that standpoint. So we're pleased to know that we're not in a situation where we're overspending. We have under revenue. That's a structural deficit that we never ever will want to have or will have. So that gives you some sense of that. So again, I wasn't planning to go through every detail tonight. But certainly if there are questions related to that, I'll try to address those as we go. So I'm just going to pause if there are any questions related to that mid-year piece of the equation.
Can you just give me the bottom?
So
Can you roll up so we can get the bottom of it?
So this kind of shows the potential revenue. So we think the adopted budget about 99%, and of our adjusted budget. Adjusted budget meaning we have some encumbrances rolling from last year into this year. So every year we have things that we purchase at the end of the year that actually pays in the next year. So that's why they adjusted versus adopted budget differential. Make sense? So again, that's a big part of the process. The second part of the process is we do this, and again, these are a lot of spreadsheets. When I say a lot of spreadsheets, there's a lot of spreadsheet that goes into this. And so I just kind of combine some columns because there are many columns to give you some sense of when we look at just a mathematical equation. So this is this year we're playing with and trying to make some adjustments from 045 to, so this is this year's budget. So this one is not as necessarily a projection. But we start looking at projection for 25, 26, 27. Even though we do a 5-year, we know that after 3 years, it becomes truly just purely a mathematical exercise. And to some degree, 2 or 3 years become a mathematical exercise as well, because we massage the budget anyway. So it's not like we're saying to the board that, you know, yeah, we're looking at 7%, 8%, 6%, 7%, 7%. So whenever we see these kind of bottom lines that you see here, one of the things that we always say, okay, are they within margins for us to, when I say massage budgets, to start combing through all our major expense categories and see where do we have opportunities for cost reductions, or where certain trend line cost trends are going. So we're looking at this. To some people, it looks scary. Looking at this, it looks feasible as we look further years out to say we're going to have to do the combing through to get down to much more precise numbers. This is just a little mathematical exercise to say that whatever, if something increases past year by 10%, the assumption is that it's going to increase next year by 10%. Or if the trend line was going from 5 to 10, or from 5 to 10 to 15, then we make an assumption, well, next year will be 20. But the reality of this, it could be 15. So this is a pure mathematical exercise. It's kind of give us some sense of, if we really don't do any fine-tuned, detailed work on the budgeting, what does that look like, right? So this is literally, it's not a budget, just a forecast to give us a worst-case scenario to look out. And I'm always like, anything that's 6-7% range, we can massage to get down to something that's more manageable. So that's the reason why we do this exercise, because when we start doing the next year's budget, which we're going to talk about next, then we're going to see how does it fit into the sequence. What are those areas that are in these projections that we see huge spikes? And a good example of that, health insurance. We went from at one point talking to our brokers from a 20 to 25% increase, which, by the way, is the reality for a lot of school districts across the state right now. A lot of people seeing legitimate 20-25% increases in health insurance. And because of our size to a large degree, we're able to I don't want to say it's even negotiate, to squeeze people, say we need better price points. And so conversation was 20-25 to read down to 15-20. Gina, some of you probably met Gina. Gina's been here before. Who's our broker USI, going back and saying, okay, let's think about these other factors in our insurance. And so we start looking at policies. What are the things that we pay for that people never use, and that's driving costs? What are administrative function that we can do from a self-insurance perspective and reduce costs? And so right now, we're around this spot of anywhere about anticipating that our premiums might be about 10 to 15%. So we go from a calculation that's 20 to 25 to a budget that's probably going to be around the 10 to 15. I say probably because we still right now, as we speak, still having them go through, because there's a lot of movement that's taking place in the health insurance industry right now. And so we want to watch that and see how does that trend out from a year from now as well. So that's why we do this particular exercise, looking back a little bit, but looking out and saying what are those big cost pieces that we have to take into consideration. When we look at contractual compensations, we have contract. What are those big costs? What's an affordable contract? So an affordable contract isn't 1 year. Affordable contract is the life of that contract, be it a 3-year contract or a 5-year contract, right? Because once you commit to the contract, you own the contract. So we do those kind of things. What are those cost trends, and what does it look like 3 years out, 5 years out? And is it something that's affordable? Then we start peeling back more on those specific cost unit that are driving huge increases in the budget. Does that make some sense? So we're not going to comb through all 986 budget codes, but we know that certain ones that we absolutely have to figure out how do we try to squeeze out, if you will, any potential cost savings, or slow down the pace of growth in some of those areas. Does that make some sense? So that's the reason why we do this particular one with the 3-year forecast.
Can I ask you a question now?
Sure.
Where are the buses in that one?
Buses come in the form of debt service.
Right,
Yeah.
you had those, actually, I did want to go back to that because you have the debt service folded and that. was
Yeah,
something
and
you
so
were-
there's a
Yeah.
debt service chart too. So yeah, so in
Right, yeah,
well, yeah,
but
I'm
in
going
the
to show
chart
you.
you had up.
Yeah, I'm going to show you. We're going to talk about it a little bit. So here, when we come down to here, this line, all these transferred other funds. This right here, this debt service line. This is where all our debt, the highlighted in yellow, is construction debt, is any borrowing that we do. So it's our mortgage payment, right? Or those debt payments that we have. So that's all into that. So for instance, when we purchase capital construction is probably the easiest one. When we, like, Shattercon, 5 Maxwell is a perfect example. This was approved 3 years ago. Construction is starting right now, actually today, we're in the building, it's starting. So we don't go out and borrow $55 million. We look at how construction phased out, and then we borrow bonds, bond anticipation notes, to start paying off as those schedules come out. And then, once that project is complete, then we go out and do a larger borrowing, because that's when we get the 20-year, it's like your mortgage payment, right? So we borrow short-term at low interest rates to pay off, and then we borrow the bigger ones to complete the debt servicing. So that's typically socialized. Again, typically state aid, 15 to 20 years, it depends on if new construction or reconstruction. Similar with buses, we look at opportunities that on some given year, we try to pay off certain debts in whole, because most of the time the bus propositions are anywhere from $2 to $4 million, so it's a smaller versus 40 to 50 or $60 million. So we look at those debts borrowing too, and try to figure out, okay, when do we borrow, or when do we try to pay off certain things in whole, and also the length of borrowing for buses is a lot shorter. And so there's a big debate right now in with the EV land of where the state provides state aid up to 8 years, I think it is, because the initial cycle didn't align with the life cycle of the buses, and we're like, what's the point of you have a debt borrowing and you're not getting reimbursed aid for something that's already outside of the life cycle? So there's a big debate for the state about that. So that's where all that falls into the yellow debt service line.
Do you have something that shows like, because you talked about these big buckets, like the one that is on for this, in tonight's budget is also for capital improvements as part of the facility plan, but then there's 5 Maxwell, and then there's the buses.
So I not for tonight, I will, but for we do the next one, I'll bring the debt service schedule to show how that looks.
Okay, like it actually shows the each, okay, thanks.
We have it, I just don't have it right now.
Thank you.
You got it from Vanessa? Like that? Thanks. So that's that. The next one I want to pick up on a little bit is so again, there's several slides here that you've seen before, so I'm not going to go repeat some of those slides as we move forward, because this presentation is built on itself from the first budget assumption one. So you've seen a lot of these things in the beginning, but as we go through it, we start to add more details. And again, this is not meant to show every single thing that people request. It's meant to highlight certain things that's indication of some areas of focus as we move forward. So I'm just going to start on this page for a second. We knew coming in, actually we knew right after COVID, that health insurance is going to do this, because there's a lot of loss in that market space, and we know it's going to recover, and they recover by increasing premiums and things of that nature. So we knew that. We knew that pension costs be fluctuating right now. They're decent, but again, we're watching the market, and typically a year or two lag before what happens in 2025 hits us in 26, 27, and that's where we have to think about those kind of things. The growth factor has been pretty flat for us as a school district. There are some places that are, I don't know how they're seeing 5 or 6% tax cap calculation, but they are, and some places actually need it. You're going to see a lot more school districts this year that are talking about reductions and cuts than in normal, and some of it is predictable when you think about we were on 2 years of a lot of COVID funds, and as much as people had off-ramp strategies, it's hard to get rid of something that people have grown accustomed to, and those things are now embedded in budgets, and now you don't have the insertion of federal revenues coming in, and so you create a situation where budgets are out of line. So we knew that piece of it, and so we had to do the same thing of unpacking all our key federal funds and making sure that those things are taken care of as well. So on the same note, we still want to focus on some key things. We still want to take advantage of personnel management is a big part of what we do. We hire people, so we try to figure out how to be best. 85% of our budget, roughly, is salary and benefits. So the personnel management is absolutely key to how we contain and control costs for the budget itself, make sure that the budget is viable from year to year. We still want to make sure that academically and operationally we're providing a quality experience. regardless, that's always a priority for us as a system. And when there are opportunities to expand programs, we look at some of those opportunities as well. So that's kind of the fundamental premises, if you were to drive the budget process, but I think it's important. As I said before, right now, as of last week actually, right now we're looking at that 10 to 15, which is pretty significant since we spend probably almost $40 million on health insurance. So having that percentage come down quite a bit is a pretty significant piece for us as well. So and the retirement costs, we've had reserves. You're going to hear about that. We've had reserves built in for days like these, and that's the reason why we've been doing reserves. That's why ERS passed a reserve probably 15 years ago, and TRS I think was about 10 years ago, allowing school districts to some capacity to have reserves to offset costs. So you're not sitting here saying we're going to balance our budget by cutting costs, and yet you can offset that by having some reserves to deal with that, so you can still provide programming services. So the reserves are doing what the reserves, at least proposed here, is doing what the reserves are supposed to be doing as we move forward. One thing I want to always prioritize again is that, you know, service file needs is important for us, so we build a budget with the notion of making sure that we have the capacity to address the needs of students with some of the greatest needs. And so that's one of the things that we look at very carefully throughout the budget process as well. And then we start thinking about, you know, the enrollment implications. The good thing is enrollment is relatively stable across the district, has been for the last several years, while places are seeing significant downturns in enrollment. It was slightly decreasing, but relatively stable when you think about in the larger scheme of how enrollments are happening across the country, across the state. People just having less kids. I mean, that's the bottom line. And in-migration is helping us, people moving into the district versus new birth, live birth increases. So we knew that was going in. But again, something we have to look for future years. The retiree options, we always look to leverage those pieces as we move forward. And so this is where the retire rates break out right now. By program levels, and so Dr. Wilson-Turner and Jenny has already started talking about what are some priority areas that we're going to try to get out there early and try to hire for, because some areas are just super competitive because you don't have the people out there. So how do we try to get ahead of that curve and try to get some quality folks in the pipeline? And then there's some areas that, quite frankly, we're going to get hundreds of applicants for. So we're always trying to balance that piece of it as we think about when do we start looking at anticipated vacancies and things of that nature. So, and trying to leverage that replacement piece as much as we can to offset either increasing existing costs and or potential additional pieces to the budget itself. Again, as I'm going, if there's something pop up, just either wave or something so I can make sure that I'm not going too fast. This year, because of knowing it was a tight budget, and plus, quite frankly, we've been very consistent about appropriately staffing an anticipated program. We didn't anticipate there was going to be a large increase in staffing. So the aids that we see here now is surrounding some, we're seeing, again, so you're going to hear this story for a few years, kids coming into the K space with much more significant needs. And all these programs require more bodies in spaces. And so some of this is largely for that, and we have some opportunities to look at some staff differences. Saratoga for the center, I put this more, it's not a huge cost piece, but it's an important piece. We have a part-time position now, and they're going to rehire for a full-time position. So you think that 2 halves make a whole? Well, 1 whole give us more than the 2 halves will ever give us, because of the simple capacity and ability for that person to have more people on their caseload. So they're going to move towards that direction, so it'll help us quite a bit with some of the elementary and middle school caseload, where we have some families that are either getting outside services, or the services could be more frequent for those families. So again, not a huge cost factor for us, but a huge impact factor for those families.
Can I just ask a question? When we talk about FTEs and everything, now, I know you plan for years to come. So we know with 5 Maxwell, you're going to need so many, right? How do you kind of start to think about that now for?
So that conversation, funny that you said that. I'm looking at Dr. Wilson, she's smiling. We're going to start aggressive assertiveness, probably a better word, planning for that this spring, getting folks together. When we did the capacity for SED, we had to give some sense of space and number. So we have a rough estimate of what's needed, and now we have to look at what we have minus and then what's left, and then what we have to build, plan for. So that conversation for 26, 27 is actually gonna start in spring of 25 right
That's
now.
what I figured. Okay.
And so, well, ironically, because you were at professional practices, that was the topic at professional practices, this past Thursday. And so at some point, we're going to be suggesting to the board that we need to start looking at quite frankly, with you, somebody who's gonna be the administrator for that building, because that's the detail work that has to take place. And I say that because I came here, '05, when Shattercon had just finished construction, and we had to get somebody in there right away to make sure all the details of that building is ready, because there's tons and tons and tons and tons of detail. And staffing is a big piece of it, transportation is a big piece of it. So all those conversations are gonna heat up quite a bit this spring, so we have the benefit of time to go through various editions of things before we say this is it. So we're gonna start those conversations late April, May, June, following through the summer, into the fall. So this time next year, we obviously have to have what we anticipate for 26, 27. Does that make sense? So it seems like a long window, but it's really not when you think about the magnitude of work that has to take place. But we do have a pretty good draft of what we think it is. We have to submit all this stuff to the state for the initial preliminary approval. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was just wondering how you works into your numbers
Yeah,
when you were
yeah.
trying to figure it out now.
Yeah. The enrollment ones, the ones that we always get, art and music is always, we do part-time because a lot of it is schedule-based and trying to fit in schedules all over the place, all the time. This Tech Aid one is just again, it's not a huge money one, but it's talking about, as we expand CTE offerings, for example, you need to have additional bodies in those spaces when kids are using heavy machinery and things of that nature. You can't have one person with 15, 20 kids. You need to have additional assistance there. So we've always had someone over in that space for a while, and so we're going to make that the additional FTEs again, because those programs are expanding quite a bit and they're pretty popular and more kids taking them. So that's like a good news thing to show that as we do one thing, and that's another thing, but it's a need that's not a huge dollar piece, but a huge piece of it. And I just put this piece on here as an indication that our commitment, because literacy is one, it's a statewide initiative, and as a school district, we have been engaged in literacy work forever. In fact, somebody reminded me today's interview that back in 2008, when we first started some of this stuff and what the theories were then and what the theories are now, you look back and thought like, okay, the whole script kind of flipped between then and now. And so we're continuing to invest in these things because it's good. It's good instruction. It's good foundation for kids. And so I just put down for the board, for the public to know that it's none of this stuff is fluff. All the stuff is things that we think will position our kids for success through that 13-year odyssey if they're fortunate enough to start us with kindergarten as they go through the system. So these are some things. When we started FLAG, we had that grant. Giants gave us a grant to offset one of these positions. The grant was not there, and it's pretty popular. Girls Flag is pretty popular. So this is why that position is there, because we knew it was a seed money to get that whole thing going. It's not a lot of money, but certainly a huge impact on the young ladies who participate in that piece of it. And then we're trying to do some neat things for 6th grade transition. We know that 6th grade is a tough transition for some kids. And I can certainly attest to that as a parent for one of my kids. So trying to do some things with some 6th grade orientation to get kids in here in the summer to really get oriented to the school, because if you ever go through that first week, well, I think some of you have seen it, even when we do the walkthrough, in the middle school, there's lockers and kids and they're all 6th graders. And so how do we try to make that a much more seamless process for kids? And so not a lot of money, but again, huge impact on those kind of things. And some neat stuff that we're doing, like, writers in residence, making the experience much more practical for kids. And so I put that because we talk about engagement all the time. So engagement opportunities in the classroom. How do we bring people who are doing this in real life and say to kids, this is how this is. This is how you make a documentary movie. This is how you do those kind of things. And so those are kind of neat things that Kathy Sherwin and some of her folks have been doing over the years. And now we're trying to just get it into the scheme of this expectation, this is something we do, and not something that, if we kind of want to do, versus this is a good part of experience for kids as we move forward. Same thing like last year, we had some grant funding to do the math bridge program, and it's one of those, we saw the benefit of it, for kids to get, because kids, particularly kids who are accelerated, and we assume that, okay, this is a kid goes from 3rd grade to 5th grade math, but they still get exposed to what 4th grade content was. You know, and so how do we create those bridge opportunities? So when they're in that accelerated piece of it, they're aware of those foundational type things, right? So that's an example of one of those kind of things that we have to move. De-escalation training is a regulation, and so we're doing a lot of training right now. Eventually get all employees exposed, either trained and or exposed to it. So that's something I put on there, and more for us to make sure that this institution stays as one of those things to deal with de-escalation training. Just when it's a state regulation, we have to train people up. And the last piece is an interesting one, and I'm not sure if the board probably know, but you heard from Ray last week with the Smart Schools grant. We purchased generators, 2 projects back in 2018 maybe. So we have generators for each school. Certainly the high school has more generators because the high school is also the backup for a lot of other systems. But the piece that what we want to do now is, right now the generator is almost like standalone, but we want to have them part of our medicine system. It's basically, it's a system that controls everything. So that we can know if or when a generator is working before we find out that we need it and it's not working, right? And or we can control those factors as a part of our larger system. So this is what we're trying to do with all those generators, to again, putting everything to one system so we can know that in an emergency situation, we know what we have, what we're dealing with, and those kind of capacity issues. Because otherwise, we just did a test. David, I'm looking at you as the last break there. We did a test of all the generators where we basically shut all the power down in the building and see what the generator, how long does it take to come up and what is it actually backing up. And is it backing up all the things that we think it should be backing up? And is it doing consistently and why not? Asking all those questions. So this is now led to the next thing. So we can see that without having to shut down the power down the building and go through this gyration. If hope that makes some sense for you. But again, those are the kind of things that when we think about the budget, those are the things that we have to do. So just purely by the numbers, when we did that preliminary piece of it, again, we go through editions of this all the time. Many editions of the budget process. So for the first time we ran through it, myself, Kathy, we came out with, okay, the budget, so this is last year's budget, 2013. Then we look at those contractual, those things that we add to the budget, right? So just basically, if we do nothing, this is what it costs. It costs $11.3 million more to doing all the things that we do. Then we look at the requests, and the requests came in, a wide variety of different requests, at 2.3. And then the strategic adjustments are basically so that we know, so that we don't lose anyone in the budget process. What I mean by that, there are people who are paid out of federal grants. So we put all those names in the hopper, and then we back them back out. So we don't have a situation to say, oh my God, we forgot that Naomi was paid out of this grant, and that grant doesn't exist anymore, and how are we going to pay Naomi? So just an example. So we put all those staffing right back into our staffing protocol, and we clean them up and say, is this the person that's supposed to be doing that? So the source of revenue becomes irrelevant. It's about the needs and the purpose. And once we come to that conclusion, then we start saying, okay, what's the revenue source for those people? Are they supposed to be in Title I grant? Are they supposed to be in special ed grant? So we pull those back out. So that's why you see this negative adjustment of pulling those things back out and putting them back out in the grants versus being a part of the general fund. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And that's good.
No, the only question is, earlier when you were showing the money that was coming in for federal funding, it was actually just under that amount.
Yeah, so
this is more than that.
Yeah, so most of this is federal grants.
Okay.
For staffing, some of it is federal grant for certain things that we're going to purchase through grants other than staffing. So we have the title grants,
right?
And then we also have like recovery grants, and we have. So when I say grants, not only the
it could be something other than federal.
So any grants, so most of it is federal grants. That's it. Thank you for the clarification. But we put any position that we have in the district right now, regardless of how they're funded, in the hopper of all our staffing and comb through all those staffing to make sure that we know who's doing what, why they're doing it, do we still need to continue or not. And once that determination is made, then we say, how are they funded and under what conditions are they funded? Does that make sense? Yeah. And then we pull those back out of the equation. So that's our way to make sure we don't lose. We're talking about we have 2,200 bodies in the district, and we don't never want to have a situation after the fact that we forgot that this person was this because it was in a different funding source. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So when we first did that, we came in, 4.75, okay, reasonable, okay. So then the next big question was, Okay, well, how does that 475 then, so that's the expenditure side of the equation. How does that look on the revenue side of the equation? So the revenue side of the equation, as you know, right now, we're using the governor's run for aid purposes. And I mentioned last week that the Assembly and the Senate came in, and their numbers are slightly higher. We anticipate that foundation aid is going to be higher across the state. I don't know what does that mean for Shen specifically, and therefore I don't anticipate it's going to be a windfall for us. But any plus is better than negative, so we take whatever it gets. But this number is based on the governor's proposal, 67 million in foundation aid. Then we look at other revenues. So other revenues is all those other things, interest income, all those other things combined. So for simplification, I just put those three large categories because the largest portion of our revenue is actually property tax. And so property tax is what drives it. And so for board members who are curious, so I try to put like links to see how we came up with the tax cap calculation. In case you have nothing else to do at night, you can indulge
Because
yourself.
everyone's gonna say, why is it 2%?
Exactly, and it's a formula, right? So I put a link in there. So we go to this piece of it. So we have the expenditure side, and we start looking at the revenue side. And so right now, for that, if with the current expenditures, we would have to increase the tax levy by 5.25. The tax cap is 3.29. So that creates a gap, and you can look at the gap as two ways to resolve the gap. Either figure out how to enhance revenue or reduction in expenditures, right? So a little bit, that's where we are. Do we have some opportunities to enhance revenue, which is the purpose of reserves? That's why the recommendation is here. Or do we say, no, we don't want to spend any reserve, we're going to cut programs? My recommendation is what we're proposing are solid programming offerings, and we have reserves for exactly these reasons. And we have reserves that, quite frankly, should not say that we're going to, if worst case scenario, for multiple years of being able to address this. So it's not like a 1 year thing, like, oh my God, we use all our reserve 1 year, next year we have nothing. We'd never be in that predicament, right? So that's why I share that piece of it, because that is the dilemma, if you will, if you want to call it a dilemma. To me, it's just a decision point. You know, do we go and make some reductions? And so, in fact, I was talking to principals meeting today. On the reduction side, the slope is like this, sharp down. On the reserve side, it's more gradual, because it gives us a longer lead time to decide how much reserves, because each year you have the potential of contributing back into that reserve to build it back up. And also, quite frankly, with you, as we know from year to year to year, 26 is the election cycle. And in the election cycle, no one wants to have anyone unhappy. So all of a sudden, you get way more money than you anticipated, and you don't know where it came from, but it's there, because that's the nature of election cycle in state politics. Next year, in a huge election year, 26. So I share that thing. So we kind of take those things into consideration. So do we want to go down this slippery slope, or do we want to have this and preserve quality programs in the middle? So essentially, that's the decision point, right? That's been reserved now. So we looked at this and like, okay, we got this 2.7 million situation. What are we going to deal with it? How are we going to address it? So again, conversation. Good.
So technically, you could actually exceed the tax cap.
You can with a supermajority, but to exceed it by more than 2.5% is tough.
Right.
You're right. That is a third option.
I'm just saying that there is another option.
Yes, I'm
not
sorry,
to say
correct.
we want to use it.
Correct.
Yeah.
60% majority. Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Correct. That is a third option, and it's people who have gambled. Most people don't win.
Yeah.
So
There's several in Long Island, I think, that tried to exceed and several times and they failed.
you don't win, and believe it or not, and I'm not going to say because I'm not going to jinx it. But once upon a time, there was huge tax back groups here in this district. In fact, that's why they changed the contingency law because of Shen. Went out in 1993, 94, 3 times in a row with the same budget, voted down. The state commissioner said, we're going to change the rules. You cannot go out with the same budget every time. You're going to have to make adjustments, and they change the contingency laws. And so we don't want to get back to that place, and because I think this community has been extremely supportive of the things that we do. So we try to figure out how do we balance what we propose and how do we balance to ensure that what we can do, the notion of repeatable successes, we can keep doing it, right? So we always position ourselves where we can control our destinies. I'm looking at particular Naomi and Deanna and Gus for the most part been on the board, because I think 7 years ago we were on that Peter on that coming off some major reduction, and we were like, we got to control our destiny because the politics was nasty. And we gotta figure out how do we get to a place that we're controlling our destiny as a school district and not sitting here crossing our fingers because the budgets were late, ridiculously late. We getting budgets almost May and we making decisions. And we're like, we cannot sit around and waiting for people to make decisions that in places we're making reductions in budgets and then they get aid after the fact, but their budget already been passed and they already cut staff and just not a good situation. So that's when we were really intentional about looking at how do we establish reserve, how do we use reserve so that we can always be in a situation where we control our destiny. So we'll just kind of give that perspective because I think it's going to come right into this. So and again, let me pause and say, you know, I just got to give this example and of kudos to Kathy because you all haven't seen her in a while. She and I had I think it was we always have a standing Wednesday meeting. And so because of budget, we were doing Monday, Wednesday, and sometimes Friday, virtual. And so the Monday call, you know, she was like, it's like, Kathy, yeah, we don't have to do the mid-year projection things. We don't have to do, let's just focus on the budget pieces. This was on Monday call, like 5 o'clock. And so she was kind of, okay, I'll be darned. Next morning I got up, all those pieces were there, and I was like, you know, and I say that because I think sometimes when people see the end product, they really don't have a full appreciation of what really goes in, and sometimes, quite frankly, sacrifices, right? To go in to do all the analysis so that this piece makes sense to people. Because she and I were talking about, let's comb through the staffing again. Literally, let's comb through the staffing. And so we send out to Jenny, to Cecily, to a whole bunch of people, like, look at them again, look at the people, make sure that all the people we think are vacancies we're gonna backfill, all the part-time, so again, we talk about combing through, literally, think about a combing through over and over and over, and making sure that assumptions that we're making are assumptions that are correct, over and over and over. So we did that to try to make sure, again, because staffing is where the money is, right? That's where we pay people. So we did a lot of stuff. Then we started looking at some of the assumptions, and so on the phone with USI folks and saying, let's talk about health insurance again. We got a self insurance component that should reduce some of the administrative overhead. Let's talk about all those kind of things over and over again to try to come down to first we were 25 to 20, then it was hedging the bet, and somebody was like, well, I don't know, it could be 15, 20. Okay, the fact that you just told me it could 15, 20, I think we can try to see if we get the 10 or whatever. And so they started looking at usage data, you know, over the number of years, who used what are the high-end meds that are coming out, because that's what's really driving some of the RX costs, some really high-end meds. All the commercials you see on television, those meds are ridiculously priced, and people see them and they want them. And so how do we look at those kind of things again? So I'm sharing those kind of things with you. Those are insight. If we look at some of those kind of things, and then we look at compensation trends over the years and see how those things come into play as we move forward. So that's on the expenditure side. On the revenue side, we did the federal funds I already mentioned before. On the revenue side, we then start looking at reserves and say, why do we have certain reserves in place? And what are the conditions with those reserves, right? So I'm going to talk about that for a second here. So again, with that combing in, we reduced that contractual piece from 11+ million to about 10.4. So the combing was worthwhile. It was a $983,000 combing. So that's a heck of a hairdo.
So with that, do you mean positions that you found are
so
not needed?
it's either the position that we found or things that we could do differently with staffing, things that we could do differently with health insurance. It was more than staffing. The combing was everything. Staffing was a big piece of it. The health insurance piece was a big part of it. Other supplies, looking at supply lines. What are some things that quite frankly, that during COVID, we maximized the heck out of COVID dollars. That, yeah, in the past years, we have budget X, but we don't need X anymore because we bought 3 years, Barb got more ceiling tiles than ceiling tiles can be got because we got COVID money for a lot of those things, right? So looking at those kind of things again, and not getting caught until we've always kind of budget X, so let's budget X again versus, do we still need to budget X?
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? Those kind of things. So that's what. So again, when you think about $213 million, yeah, $983,000 is not a lot, but it's a lot when you're trying to have impact.
And the only reason I ask that is because some people say $1 million less were jobs cut. You know, people are going to jump to that. That's the only reason why I asked.
Yeah, there's no position reduction.
Thank you.
No, that's pretty clear.
Okay.
So we did that, and then even some of the federal grant money, we saw that got tightened up because there's some positions that are quite frankly going to fade out anyway, just because of the nature of how some of those stipulations were. So yeah, this is not about position job cuts. It's about tightening up vacancies, salary differences, people who are retiring. We know they're going to retire putting the newest salary in it versus maintaining the older salary, all those kind of things. Does that make sense? So now we did all this, and again, not a huge reduction because it was pretty tight from the beginning, but we just kind of want to go through again and fine tune it, and believe it or not, before we come to a final proposal, we're going to look again to make sure that have we really looked at everything, or have other things changed between now and 2 weeks from now when we have a final recommendation. So this is a work in progress. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
you're a little, I mean, I'm trying to think of how much you usually come down in 2 weeks. I'm just looking at that.
So it won't come down much, to be honest with you.
Really? She didn't say that.
No, it won't come down much because, and so this is, I mean, in the past, our budget's been about 3.75-ish.
Right.
So it's not that far off, so it won't come down much in expenditure-wise because unless we're cutting something, and right now, there's nothing being proposed to cut. And the things that we propose to add, none of those things singularly are significantly expensive. Anyway, it's a lot of small things that adds up over time. And even give credit to Cecily today at our principal meeting. She said she's going to go back again and look at those things that the request to make sure that because condition changes, you know, and all those conditions still hold in that lend to that request. And so that's why I say to you that this process is many people looking at it from different angles, and then fine-tuning information that goes into the hopper, so to speak. So we'll be doing a lot more of that over the course of the next, again, 2 weeks. I think it's 2 weeks that the board has to adopt the budget, first week in April, if I'm not mistaken. So this will be combed through again as we move forward. But with that being said, we have a solution to look at some of these things. And a big part of the solution was looking at some adjustments with the reserve pieces that we talk about. And so I'm going to let me just jump to that. Again, you have some hyperlinks that you want to go back and look at these details. You can, if you want to go back and look at the reserves, you have a hyperlink to the reserves, those kind of things. One of the things that we didn't want to do, and you hear school districts do this all the time, let's increase our unappropriated fund balance. It's a slippery slope to a structural deficit. It's a slippery slope because that would drive so fast that you'll find yourself literally just creating yourself a structural deficit that you can't backfill, because the only way you get fund balance is having a gap differential between what you spend and what you, and if you're, so it's an awful slippery slope. That's why I gotta tell you, stay away from it. I think that's like desperate last resort type things. In fact, I would say let's go super majority before you get down this slippery slope, because that slope goes fast. So that's why we stay away from that. The second one, reserve that we have always had on this employee benefit reserve, that the benefit by regulation, you can only use from reserve up to the amount that you're planning to expend that year. So that's why that's limited. So that's why that stays at this, because we typically spend around 600, 660, in some cases 675. So we couldn't say grab more from that reserve, increase that one. That's why that one didn't stay, because the regulations stipulate that you could only spend what you do that. Where we have flexibility is with TRS, ERS reserves. And so just to give you some exposure piece. We're slated to spend this year about $5.8 million. Actually, in this year, I keep saying this year, like next year already. About $5.8 million for TRS. So the proposal of 2.1 is not a lot in comparison to what we're planning to spend. Because one of the things that you know, auditors look at the regulations, what required, and also want to make sure it's reasonable. You can't say, I'm going to spend $3 million, but I want to use $6 million from my reserve to offset $3 million. You're not offsetting that. You're more than offsetting that with that particular reserve, right? So the math has to make sense as we look at those kind of things. ERS reserve, we have always had it, but we never had to use it. Because ERS, employee retirement system. So the first one is our support staff, second one is certified teaching staff and our certified administrators. So TRS reserve, again, we expend about $8 million or so. So with that, we kind of look at it, and Kathy and I have been talking about, do we look at, but we have more money in ERS reserves than we have in TRS reserve. That's the reason why it's a smaller amount in that, bringing that equation in. But we're still kind of looking at that right now to see, let's look at those two again and see if we create a better balance between the 2.1 and the 747. But the bottom line is the two numbers still gonna be roughly the same. The question is, which one we look at the reserve and then we look at the trajectory out and say, which one gives us more capacity for how many years out if we do X versus X minus one, how many years that buy us potentially, worst case scenario. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking at right now, but for this purpose, I kind of want to show that we have a plan to balance the equation, if you will, by looking at those things. So we're gonna look, again, looking at those things in the coming weeks here to see if we want to keep the trajectory we're going or not. So again, I'm sharing that with the board because if you see some adjustments with that, so for instance, TRS.
So Oliver, could you just explain how that would work as far as the reserve funds that we approved at one point, and this is for next year's budget, so we'd be saying that the amount in the actual budget that voters are
It's a
voting
revenue
on
side.
will be a lower amount because we're taking money from reserves.
So instead of having that expenditure being offset by increase in tax levy, that increase is being offset by reallocation out of the reserve into the general fund.
Okay,
So
and it's
just-
not gonna, 2.1 million seems like a lot. I
Right,
mean,
so we have 7.6 in that particular
right,
reserve.
that's what I was wondering, how much?
Yeah,
would
that's
we
right,
get?
yeah, so that, and
Okay.
versus the other one is 4. So
Okay.
one is almost, because one has been around longer. In fact,
Okay.
TRS reserve was probably around 10 years before, TRS reserve. Don't quote me to the date, but it's one been around significantly longer, so that's why so that's the reason why that differential between those two things.
So the number that you just, but because we still have, we have an unappropriated balance, right?
Yeah, so that's the.
And so it's gonna grow even more, or does that reflect that? The
Mhm.
number that you just shared?
The unappropriated fund balance, we always have that 4% limit period
Right.
anyway.
Right,
So-
but we usually take that money in.
Yeah, so that fund balance is where when we potentially go over that 4% limit, we contribute to the reserves to stay
Right.
below that.
Right, and were we gonna contribute again?
Yeah, so
Okay.
so this year we probably contribute some. It's
Okay.
still early to predict that, but we anticipate we might, even though, so remember when I saw the mid-year projection, we were talking about 99%, 90.3, I think,
Right.
or whatever it was. But on the revenue side, we were like 103, 104. So we know that there's a gap because of interest. So that additional amount, we probably replenish these reserves before we actually start using. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
So that's the plan, because the plan is to have property tax property tax levy aligned with the property tax amount. So, and again, I'm sharing that you know, this is a process, right? So we'll be, again, going through this a few times before. And so I'm saying this to the board, that if we were to stop, everything would stop right now. We have a budget that meet our needs, which is our first priority. One that's at or below the property tax cap, the 3.29, and one that's sustainable. You know, and I always say that we cannot make commitments for things that we know in the future we can't pay for. Because we literally setting ourselves up either for structural deficit or a lot of heartaches when we in the job cutting business. Because when people say reduction of programs, it's someone that goes with that program, right? And so because again, we hire people. Yes, we purchase a lot of things. You saw last week, we purchasing all these computers, but we purchase all these computers because there are people that use them. So I always have to kind of come back to that human dynamics and the things that we do to say, how does these things impact what we do for kids? And so this whole process is designed, how do we continue to ensure that the experience for kids in year one is going to be comparable to the experience for kids in year two? As far as you can foreseeable reason to look down the road, we're going to see quality experience for kids. And so that's where we are in the process right now with the budget sequence. There's just some data comparison, so you can have some comparison to see where tax levy, the 3-year cap is 3.11. It's been pretty flat. Our tax levy is a little bit higher than the average, but again, pretty reasonable considering all things considered, especially when you think about, we won't have it on this, we'll have it probably maybe next week or we meet after that. When we start looking at the actual tax impact on taxpayers, that's been, in contrast to parts, it's been a reduction because the assessed valuation of properties, so your socializer costs a larger base, so people don't have to pay as much unless, you know, you happen to go and buy a bigger house, okay, it goes with the territory. And so from a taxpayer perspective, that's also been pretty flatline, even regardless of whatever the levy amounts have been, it's pretty flatline from that perspective. So that's kind of where we are right now with the budget process. And decision points is, kind of recap real quick, we're gonna go back again, look at all those things, fine tune, make sure we ask all the questions over and over again. If we come up with the same answer, okay, that means we're onto something. If we have any questions of doubt, we're gonna say, why do we have questions of doubt? We're gonna look at the reserve pieces again to make sure that, is this the best balance of those two reserves? Because again, looking at what's in those reserves, comparison to their costs, because we cannot have a situation where if we kind of run the math and say, if we were to do this for X number, how long can we do this for? And quite frankly, if we can't do this potentially for 3 or 5 years down the road, we probably should not be doing it as aggressively because things compound, right? And so those are the kind of things, the thinking behind the process. I'm sharing that with you as a board because you don't have the benefit of hearing the conversations, right? So these are the conversations we think about. If we do this, let's play it out, let's run it, let's unpack it. My favorite saying, let's unpack this whole thing over and over and again, and let's put it, so if we unpack it, can we get it all back in the same suitcase, or do we need to do some things differently? Or, I use a trip thing because, I don't know about you, I'm like one of those people that I'm always suspect, yeah, I'm gonna bring shorts because I'm gonna work out, so I pack shorts and t-shirts and all these kind of things, and I never take them out of the suitcase and think like, I could have brought up half the size of the suitcase, because half the stuff I don't use. So literally, I share that with you because that's the logic, right? Are we actually going to do those things? Have we actually done those things? Are we going to do this? Should we do something different with that resource? So literally, I tell you, it's not complicated, but it's just a lot of simple logic coming together all the time to present something that, at the end of the day, people come from one year to the next, and it's a seamless progression. So I'll pause there. If there are any questions, you do have some links, and if you look at those links, something doesn't make sense to you, or if you look at a link and it doesn't open up, chalk it up to me. Me trying to hyperlink things after midnight sometimes doesn't work as well, but I try to test them. I try to have Vanessa test them, but sometimes it worked for us because we are part owners on it, and we realize, oh, that's right. So if you run into any of those kind of things, just let us know. But I try to give it a link for people who really want to see more of the details behind some of those things. And next time we'll talk about getting to more revenues because hopefully we'll get a better handle on where the state's going. With some of the revenue talks right now, there's a lot of stuff out there. We get a better handle on what some of these potential new regulations may have impact for us and what those kind of things mean. Hopefully the news come out of some of the big rock areas like health insurance, the fine tuner will remain in that 10 to 15 range. It'd be nice if we get closer to 10 than to 15, but those are big rocks, right? Simple single unit cost that costs $40 million. If we save a percentage or two, that's a sizable chunk that goes back to, I think the question was actually over here, will that come down? If it's come down, if we see those sizable chunks of things as we move forward.
I think you sort of addressed it, but just in terms of like my thought process is around like sustainability, right? So if we're spending more, including the reserves, right, than we're taking in terms of revenue, tax revenue, foundation aid, et cetera, how long can that go on before the reserves run out, I guess?
Yeah, so our plan is never, great question, Tom. We're never going to plan for a structural deficit. So again, we think about why reserves exist. And reserves are short-term as we look to recalibrate off certain things. And I think some places, and I would say we're doing a heck of a better job with it than a lot of places, but you're going to see it. In fact, we just talking about staffing today. You're going to see a lot of people offloading a lot of good people that we're going to be the beneficiary of. And the irony of it is, while that's a good thing, but we may have to pay more for good people. And so now we have to keep that in the back of our mind when we start thinking about hiring people and those kind of things, right? So I give you an example so when we think about the decision we made from a global or from a macro, probably better using an economic perspective, it has to be one that takes into consideration all those are the micro factors that can throw a budget into a tailspin, right? And so our off-ramp strategy, if you remember, we were talking about federal funds. We identified right away some of the things that we know that we want to continue, just good things. And so now we're trying to figure out how do we bake that in And once it's baked in, then you create opportunities as staff change, people change, to do the same but at a lower cost, so to speak, in some instances. So we're trying to bake certain things into the equation, so as the budget materializes. Next year, quite frankly with you, next year, the only conversation we'll have around budget is staffing for Shenendehowa. And so we know that, and so and people know that. When I say we, administrative otherwise.
For
that's
5
5
Maxwell.
Maxwell?
Shenendehowa, because it's a newer school. No,
Why
this-
are we budgeting for anything?
No, but it's because it's the newest, that was like still the newest school in my head. That's the newest school in my
We all
head.
heard what
We
you
got
said.
you.
Yeah, I gotta start calling it, I gotta propose, have the board adopt it,
Maxwell.
have the board
Yeah, you need it.
adapt the name so we can actually start calling the name.
When is
Um,
that, by the way?
What's that?
When is that, by the way?
Yeah.
No, I said,
I mean, you have,
I need to propose so the board
Gotcha.
can formally do it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think we need to do that, especially once now it's started. We didn't want to do something until we know, quite frankly, that we can build what we said we can build.
You got a name, but no building.
So now that we know that, so I share this, so that's a great question, Tom. So we're not building a budget, crossing our fingers and hoping. We're building a budget that's reasonable, yeah, we can make those adjustments. And we know that this is that transition adjustment. And next year, 26, 27 will be the same thing. And once those cost exposures for 5 Maxwell Early Learning Center comes baked into the equation, that becomes a part of the equation that we have to consider moving forward, right? But we have to take those things into consideration over a 3 or 5 year horizon.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does, thank you.
Buses.
Okay. All right. No, I thought you were asking.
No, I got nothing.
No, so Melinda's here, and so the next one we want to talk about is, bus resolution. I lost. No, I had a PowerPoint open down here, but somehow I don't have it anymore. All right, so Melinda, I'll just have to scroll for you. I'm just going to have to scroll instead of using your PowerPoint.
It's your email.
Oh.
No, I have it, 1 second, let me just, one technical thing, let me just do this real quick.
No.
It has it. It was only that one.
You wanna click, or you want me to click?
You can.
Alright, so, Belinda is here. Okay,
So tonight, we have a little bit of a different proposition that you're normally used to.
I don't know if it's on.
Can you really not hear me?
I just don't think it's on.
For the video.
For the video, yeah.
Oh.
Should be able to just slide a button.
Button on top.
Who's our IMS person?
Oh, it's
Wow.
There you go.
We're gonna show you, two different type of things. Dr. Robinson had talked about unpacking stuff and considerations that we kind of look at and do when we're coming up with these things. And then we'll show you what our final recommendation would be. So the first slide that we'll look at is just gonna be some criteria, reminder of what we look at when we look to replace buses. We look at age of a bus, mileage, repairs, when repairs exceed the value of the bus, when maintenance cost becomes more than what, the value of the bus is, it becomes too expensive to maintain the bus, which then kind of affect those first two of safety and reliability. More breakdowns, which affect safety, we don't want that to happen. And then also, Dr. Robinson also touched on this a lot, was the budgeting and borrowing considerations regarding the buses, as well as the state mandate that still exists regarding EV buses. So the next slide is just, it just shows that you see the different numbers of how many buses were purchased a year. So it's not just a fixed number of buses that get purchased or recommended for purchase. It varies on the factors I just mentioned. And it also varies on student enrollment, student needs, what type of buses we buy, how many we buy, and then in student enrollment, if numbers are up or down, we may get rid of more buses than we're buying. So one year we may get rid of 25, but we're purchasing 20 to keep that. The goal is to keep, you know, a young, healthy fleet. You can see one of the years a couple of years ago we bought 12 or 9. We're able to do those things because we keep a young, healthy fleet. And I believe one of the years that we bought 12, we helped out build grounds with some new equipment and stuff like that. We were able to do that. So, that's why the goal is to keep a young, healthy fleet for safety, reliability. The next one, we'll get into some numbers. So, like I said, we're going to show you 2 different types of models that we discussed with a final recommendation. And we're showing you this basically so you can see one of the models requires many contingencies to happen before we can move forward with it, many considerations before we can move forward with it. So we want to just show you what the process is for that when we discuss these things. So this is our first recommendation, which is 13 large buses, which is our 66 passenger type C buses, 5 30 passenger type A's, which is our smaller buses, and then we have 2 24 passenger buses that are equipped for free wheelchair slots.
I just want to point out, just keep this in mind, 184 for a 66 internal combustion bus, because when you get to the other price, you see the dramatic difference.
So I spoke about contingencies for one of the plans, and these are some of them, right? So obviously, voter approval for the bus expenditure has to happen. Voter approval for our capital projects and infrastructure has to happen. Funding, we need funding. If we cannot get funding, you'll see that price go up even more. So funding has to happen. We have to obtain that funding. And then the fourth one I want to point out too is necessary infrastructure and power upgrades to be completed by the winter. That has to happen right away. We have, as you know, 2 fixed EV chargers in our compound that charge our 4 EV buses, and then the small power building in the compound that delivers power to those EV chargers. That power building also powers our block heaters for our diesel buses, as well as our fuel island that's out there. In the winter months, we do not have enough power to power all of those things. So we have to do a little remodeling by the winter in order to move forward, not only with the 4 we have, to be able to charge with those 4 chargers the way they are, and then any additional we want. So that's where number 4 comes in. So we have to have that stuff done, as well as moving forward with the capital project and all of that to maintain a full EV fleet and get our compound ready. So that takes us to our next.
Can I ask you a question? Is that big? Is that included in the budget proposal for 25-26?
No, so that's where the construction piece is. The referendum
That's part of the
comes into
construction
piece.
referendum. That's a separate referendum.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So and we also looking at, we met, when did we meet? Last week? We, Linda, engineers, architects, Augie, a whole bunch of people, and National Grid folks, everybody who's in this conversation, so National Grid has been working on their end to say how much potential capacity they can bring up to the site, right? And then the piece is, how much capacity we have to accept whatever they bring. And that's where the pipeline ends and caps off. And so right now, with the 4 we have, we're at max capacity, as Belinda described. So we can jockey with the internal, the mobile ones, but they're just not designed to be as whatever. And we have a plan to potentially expand some of the existing capacity to maybe add 2 additional EVs. We have 4 now, with some renovation. And what we're trying to avoid is, we don't want to go and dig up, run underneath, and then we have a construction project a year later, we're digging up all that stuff again, run underneath. And so we're now looking at location of potential piggybacking off one of the existing buildings and avoiding some of the more costly construction piece, because everything's about length of run, right? How far from the source where the buses will be. So that conversation is happening right now to see what will it take, or should I say what is required, first of all, and then what will it take to meet that requirement for potentially next fall. It's not a long time. Construction project, as you know, it takes minimally 6-8 months just to go through the approval process at SED. So we're trying to figure out if we get some of these funding, and I'm sorry, Belinda, for jumping on your bandwagon here for a second. If we get some of these nice sort of funding to offset the cost of bus, a contingency on that is, do you have the capacity to plug all those things in right now? So the question is, yeah, we can, but not all the time. So, so that's not a good answer, right? And what I mean by that, in the summertime, we don't use block heaters, right? Because they're there to keep but the question is, we still would need the infrastructure to tap into those block heaters. So regardless, we would need to have the infrastructure. The question is where you reroute the power to. So the infrastructure piece is going to be a necessary piece regardless if we're going to add an additional buses beyond the 4 we have now. Long term, when the capital construction project comes in place, is to develop the capacity, the larger capacity, so that the bigger pipeline that's coming from National Grid, I said NIMO, National Utility, point of reference, from National Grid, when they come into the yard, the bus depot, we have enough capacity to accept what they can offer, what we need, and so that's where the larger construction project comes in. That's where we start talking about putting it's not a transformer. What's the thing that? The transformer bit. That's what I'm talking about having. So, and all of a sudden, feel like we're in the power business, but National Grid is also trying to get some funding sources to purchase some of those things that would probably be located on our property because it'd be solely for our purposes. Versus when it's not off our property, it can be used for redistribution of power every place else. And so that's where the larger capital project comes in. To expand EV capacity, be it a year from now, 2 years from now, to whatever the state requirement might be or wherever because a big piece of it still comes down to people approving purchasing of buses right now with the price point are pretty high. And so it's worth watching what's happening with the state. As you know, there's a lot of conversation with all 3 houses around, can it be a mandate? That it's not really a mandate because voters still have to local voters still got to vote on it, so it can't be a mandate unless the state's going to come up with some other funding stream. So we're watching those things to see maybe they'll come up with some funding stream, say we'll pay for infrastructure. We don't have to go through the same process of the 18 months SED for infrastructure, and you can have all this done to pay for it if you want to do it. And then it becomes a easier conversation to have with the public about purchasing the vehicles to maximize this infrastructure. Does that make some sense?
It does. And I think we can assume, at least for the moment, that the EPA is out in terms of funding.
Well, that's a whole different conversation too, right? So right now, even the NYSERDA funding that they're playing with are allocations that were already given, right? The check has already been written, put over here. And so the question we all have is that really going to be there? Because none of us, at least I don't know what the details of that arrangements were, right? We don't know if it was guaranteed funding regardless. I think there's an argument against stuff that's already allocated, but who knows, right? So that's a big piece of that conversation too that we have to watch because the offset for EV costs has to be some external funding. Because that's why I pointed out, a 66 passenger combustion, this is not environmental conversation, just a pure cost conversation. It's almost 3 times the cost. And so that's not even cost prohibitive. It's cost prohibitive, opposite, right? For us to even effectively do that with I think we're down to 180 buses now. And so 215 with spare, whatever. It's not even feasible for us to do that. We'd be spending $20-30 million a year to try to outfit, and not even the replacement cycle. So it's not even feasible from a local budget perspective to do it. And so without some major intervention by federal funds or major intervention by state funds or increasing the capacity for places to build bus at a cheaper price point. So those are the huge factors for us. And so we're taking steps. However, our steps are very limited in terms of how many steps we can take, right? And so what we're looking at now is saying, can we take it two-step for 2 more buses with these conditions. And those conditions, the first one is to try to see if we get some funds to offset the cost of those buses. At the same time, we're looking at the infrastructure piece of it. Can we in fact accommodate those 2, assuming if we get them, can we accommodate them for next winter? Or quite frankly, however long it's gonna take for them to build those EV buses, which is another conversation point.
Will they even build them without us
No.
showing that we have the right
So
infrastructure?
the answer is no, and it's kind of a no with small letters, because we can stretch it and say, well, we can play them off each other, plug in one and run one half day, plug in another one half day, but that's, so say you got 6 buses, but you don't have the capacity for use of equivalent of 3 or 4. So I'm saying, so that's why I said that piece of it. And a lot of places don't want that. They want you to say, can you fully maximize these buses? The dealers don't want, because dealers don't want to hold on to them. They don't want to build something and you say, well, sorry, we can't use them right now, because that's money lost for them. The NYSERDA grants, in fact, we're looking at that now, Belinda's looking at it, how much wiggle room that they have for that, because they have money, but it's become a challenge for them to spend it under the conditions that school districts are faced with.
Okay, so if this referendum goes through, we don't need SED another approval for this 25-26. No, that's step 4 there. We
If we find out, and I say if because we just met last week, and a lot of folks are looking at it, if we find out that to run extra capacity is something that's gonna be, that we can handle within our current budget year capacity. So when I say handle, anything that 40, 50,000 range, we can figure out. You start going over 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, that's a whole different ballgame. So that's why we want to look at that. And so literally, I don't know if they did it yet, but they're walking the yard to say, what's the closest distance we can get without the buses can't turn around? And that's a tricky part, because I don't know if you've been to a bus compound. It's compacted. It's organized well, but there's not a lot of wiggle room for us to do the things that we have to do. And we can't say we're going to jockey around and move a whole bunch of block buses, because that's also cost then to move all those things to create more space for bigger EV buses. So we can't solve one problem and then create another set of problems in trying to bring that one thing about. So to your answer, Newman, ideally, we're looking to see if we could do this without having to go through a major rigmarole with SCD. That's the ideal, but right now it's being reviewed.
Yeah, and we did, Augie hasn't been over yet, but we did decide where we would want to move those 2 chargers.
Next to that.
So we have that kind of in place, but the other thing we need to take into consideration is in moving anything, we want to make sure we don't mess up our warranty and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to kind of work through to determine what is the best path to take with doing that, to make sure we can use what we have. So this is our EV plan, and as you can see, I did put in the NISBID funding, hoping that we would get it. To Tom, EPA, we did submit for that while it was still available. However, we do not count on that because we don't meet the criteria for it. So we kind of do it anyway, and you never know, we may win the lottery, but we never count on it because we don't meet the criteria for the EPA funding. And honestly, I don't know if it's even there no more because no one's really hearing about it, but we did submit and get it in before the deadline. So the funding we kind of count on or hope to get that we think we would get would be the NYSERDA. So we added that in here. So we went with 2 EV buses. We had a lot of talk going back and forth of how many we would do, but as Dr. Robinson explained, after our current situation of our power and wanting to make sure we have what we need in order to use what we have, we decided to go with 2. And those are the prices still, but we still, keeping in mind all that, we still need to maintain our healthy fleet. So we still would need to replace the other buses that are due for replacement. And that would be still now 11, we would go with 11 Type C at the 66, still the 5 Type A, and still the 2 wheelchair capable buses. So it's still bringing us at the same amount of 20, but obviously with a different dollar amount. to the final.
I may have missed it, but what is the latest on the requirements for EVs? I know
You
last we
haven't
talked at this
you haven't
time.
missed much, to be honest with you. I'm not being facetious. There's a lot of proposals out there. Both houses want some type of change to the mandate. The Senate, which is largely Republican, is much more aggressive with the changes that they want to see. The Assembly is kind of like, well, we need to have more local authority. When you really think about it, the law is not a law because you still gotta have local approval anyway. And so this notion of you can't, so that this is like the piece that you're watching more importantly, is what happens if nothing changes in the law, what happens after 26, I think it's 26 or 28, when they say thou shalt not purchase 27, anything that's not EV. So the question then is, do we force us to starve or compel us to buy something that is pretty expensive to do? That's the first piece that I think when they're looking at the law is, because that's the first trigger point. And by the way, this is not only school buses, it's impacting trucks. And all the other big transportation freights are like, whoa, how do we move business because we can't afford to retool our entire fleet. It's going to involve new construction of houses as well. So there's a lot of things that's not out there in the media space because it's not real for people until it hits them home. Hits us home at school because of the long trajectory that we need to prepare for anything, right? And so that's the reason why the second part of this proposal is so important, that we need to say that we need to have the capacity. So I guess worst case scenario, that's 27 sticks. We can say, well, fine, if we don't purchase another single bus, almost back to your last question, Tom, in the expenditure. If we don't purchase another bus, how long can we keep our fleet in a healthy position until something else changes, right? And so it'll be foolish for us to not prepare for that, because what we can't have is to say to people, we don't have the capacity to transport kids because we didn't plan well. That's not a good conversation to have, right? So we have to plan as if that contingency is there and we're unable to fully maximize it. And so do we have the capacity, worst case capacity, to still have buses on the road and to keep somewhere around the industry average, recognizing that maintenance costs go up, the older vehicles are, and then we have to balance, juxtapose maintenance costs with not being able to do versus maintenance costs with significant costs of an EV proposition. So all of those are the factors that we take into consideration. So how do we put ourselves in a situation that we can hedge our bets against either one of those dilemmas, right? Regardless. And so almost like the same conversation I have about the budget before. How do we always put ourselves in a space that to some degree we can control some of our own destiny without having things implode because someone else put through a mandate that we can't uphold?
Just a quick question. So, as it stands, if I'm not mistaken, 2027 is when we have to start buying EV buses exclusively.
You can no longer
But we
purchase
can, right,
others.
but you can use them until
Oh, yeah, right.
2030, until 2035 or
Well, I think
beyond.
well, that's even blurry.
Yeah, right,
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
So 2035 was your whole
The
fleet.
whole fleet has to be EV. That's what I mean. So you can use,
Yeah.
so you could use them up until then. So the question I have is sort of on the other end is what we're doing enough to be able to keep a healthy fleet of.
So, and that's a good question, Tom, and the enough piece comes between, so, it's my pantry at home. I've been home last week by myself because my wife is in Pittsburgh with my kid, our kid. And so I get home at night and like, what I'm gonna eat? And then I discover all these things that were stacked in a drawer, but how she has it stacked, I didn't realize that the things were in the back were even there. And I actually just bought the same thing that was already there, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, so I said it because there's a point of like, okay, how do we have enough to sustain versus when are we buying stuff that we'll have it, but time will run out before we actually maximize the use of it. You see what I'm saying? So that's the delicate balance. And so going back to Belinda's first slide, we look at maintenance, we look at enrollment patterns, we look at those kind of things. A huge investment we just made this past year is revamping our routing system to be much more cloud-based, so we can get more precise routing to have more efficient routes, more and to use less drivers to do the same, but route efficiency, right? So as we do those kind of things, then we have to, that impacts the number of buses, right? So that's why we invested in that. So we want to say, okay, again, hedging our bets, right? That if we, worst case scenario, and we tighten up all these things, driver shortage issues aside, and those, take into consideration, what's that trajectory out? I gotta tell you, I would be absolutely unfair if I would say, yeah, we'll be good for 10 years. I could say, yeah, we'll be good for 5 with a high degree of confidence. But 5 years in life cycle is pretty long when you think about the politics of the life cycle, right? And so and plus, the reality of it is, you know, after having a bus in our fleet, we do have some older buses that we don't use as much. But after, I don't know, say 7 years, Belinda, we start seeing the uptick in mechanical issues. So that's kind of the trajectory we're looking at. Again, back to Americani's question that if we can't purchase anymore, do we have enough capacity to keep doing what we're doing for the next 5 to 7 years? I would strongly say the answer is yes. Beyond that, you know, it's being clairvoyant, which is not planning, right? It's just hoping that we get lucky and not planning for leading. So I think that's the reason why we keep investing in this, saying that we cannot have a situation that we don't have ample fleet to transport kids, not only within Shen, but how many kids you transport out district, like 1,300, whatever the number is?
Yeah, probably about that, maybe just under 10.
Yeah, so private parochial, sped, all those kind of things. So I share that with you. That's why this whole thing is way more complicated than just a number of buses we purchase.
I wanna, you obviously know this, but I wanna point out, right, that assuming we get the funding, which is likely, right, it's not impossible.
NYSERDA is
Yeah.
usually likely because they say it's guaranteed until the funding runs out. So it's not as, you know, there's not as many like restrictions as EPI. So as long as you get it in and it's there, you know, you should get it. But you don't know how many other people are putting in for it, what their selection process is it first come, first served, does it matter how many buses I'm buying as opposed to somebody else? But the way we understand it that it is, as long as it's there, we should be able to obtain it.
Okay,
So
because the differential is only 40,000 per bus, which is, I mean, it's something.
But it's not.
But it's 40,000 per bus.
You're not
I mean,
writing home about it, right?
Those buses are probably gonna go up 40,000 next year
Yeah.
anyway with the tariffs.
So
So-
exactly. So that's why I made a point. Like, remember the 188 I showed you at the beginning? Even with this reduction, we're still spending 300,000. So it's still a pretty hefty price tag. And again, I know John Q viewer is watching it, and I don't want people to even insinuate that we're having a anti-environment conversation. It's a very real, practical conversation about what we're capable to do and how we're trying to maximize opportunities in trying to do those things, right? And so we have a lot of conversation with NIMO. They're working on their end on capacity. We have the planned referendum to look to, because the reality of it is power across the state is a huge issue. Power across most states is a huge issue, and it's getting more complicated. And again, Global Foundries, the one out of Syracuse, what's it called? The new place they're proposing out there. Huge power drain. And all those places are looking at alternative power. So unless there is, quite frankly, even from a federal level, standardization of what is clean power and safe power that people are not going to find out 20 years from now that people have all kind of stuff because of how we generated power into the house, it's going to be a real point of concern and contention on how we effectively do so. And we're seeing it right now as we go to technology, for example. We have added power infrastructure in every one of our buildings I think for the last 3 referendums. Just so we can, because our buildings were designed with power plugs and ports 50 years ago, 60 years ago. And now, so I share those kind of things with you. So we have to plan for those realities, because that's where society is going, but how can we do it in a measured way, right? And so that's gonna be a big piece of what we're doing. And so the hope and the goal is, and we're working, because some places have used this referendum, we're gonna work through legal to have resolution language with the contingency built in. This is approved, and we will do this if. And absent that, we won't do that, right? So we're fair to voters to say, if we get funded, then we do these things. If we don't, then we're gonna go to these alternatives. And so that's the reason why Belinda presented in the first 2 phases, right? Combustion engine plus EV, so you can see how that progresses, right? Knowing that we still wanna get 20 buses, but what's the combination of the 20 with these contingencies? And so a couple years ago, some school districts went through that and did the what if language, and because it was new, because no one ever had to do the what if language for bus proposition before, and it withstood the legal test, and legal test, quite frankly, the Commission of Education said that it's a legal referendum language. It withstood that, and so now we're gonna work through legal again to make sure that the what if kind of approach is clear to taxpayers, so people know what they're voting on, and they also know what the contingencies are and what we would do if one thing say yay or nay, if that makes some sense. All right, so Belinda, I'm sorry, you probably went through the rest of your 2 slides already. Anything else you
Okay.
want?
So our final proposed replacement plan would be our IC plan for the things we kind of mentioned, the contingencies, the considerations, can we use it, the current power issues we are currently facing, just with the 4 we have now. You know, we would think this would be the best way to go. It maintains our fleet capacity, it meets our transportation needs of our students, and it also recognizes the challenges related to EV and capacity and cost. We have a long-term plan with that with the capital project, so there is a plan in place for that. By the time that's ready, we are ready for EVs at that point. There was, on the previous slide, you did mention funding being available for a certain amount of time and buses not being able to be ordered by, and that is true. So that was one of the considerations that we made, because you do have only a certain amount of time to use that funding, and you have to, they will not order that bus until we can give them either a completion date or it is completed, one or the other. And then what happens is if the funding runs out by that time, if you're not completed, you know, so there's a lot of nuances and considerations that we did have to look at.
So
is it not the EV buses?
So
There's two different ones here.
we're just saying worst case scenario is that what we're looking at the contingency piece, because back to your piece, if that infrastructure piece cannot work for winter 25, we're not gonna buy 2 buses that we can't use, right? So
When do you make that determination?
so now we work, that's why Belinda said that. I didn't realize that the folks had already gone out to look at the potential location, and once we say what's the best location, then they gotta do the engineering analysis and say what does it actually take to get that piece of it. And so hopefully we'll get some price tags and say, you know, is it trenching, and how much we trenching, and how much it costs to trench, how much it costs to repave the area, and do we have to dig that up at some point in the future? Hopefully not, because, so again, we want to make sure the board understand that if all that contingent work, we still want to purchase 20 buses.
So would that also, okay, so it sounds like you're saying that if you can make those changes that was listed in that last, yes.
Then we'll try to do this.
But that would also change the other referendum, would it not? Because it's included in the other referendum.
No, so the other referendum is huge. The other referendum is a whole compound.
Right.
Yeah, the other
But-
reference, this
but that
piece
piece-
this is like for 2 versus 213. That's the reason why we gotta make sure that if we do this here, it falls in line with any additional things that we're gonna do. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah. So, thank you, Belinda, appreciate it.
Thank you.
So Belinda, use more time than,
There is the bus, right?
All right, let me get out of this real quick.
No, we're not talking about
No. So again, and I'm not gonna, I said in front of votes, and I just put this up here because sometimes when people enter, and I say people and look at the board agenda or enter the conversation, they're like, well, I've never seen anything about construction project. We've been talking about construction project
Yeah.
all the time. So this presentation is actually the same presentation we shared last time. And so we just trying to make sure we put it out there more and those kind of things because, you know, that's the piece. And yeah, once we get to a point of a board acting on a resolution, then we have a much more aggressive campaign, so to speak, about it. Same way we do the budget, become part of the budget roadshow, which again, I'm not gonna walk through this in great details, but this give you, Vanessa, kudos to Vanessa. This is something Vanessa takes a lot of pride and time in trying to coordinate all these meetings, but this give you, hopefully, you can put, especially what I call the external meetings versus faculty meetings. That's what I mean by external. Certainly, like the town meetings, it's always great to have board members present. For myself personally, when I look in the audience, I see some faces that are smiling back at me. PTA meetings, a lot of PTA has been great about having virtual meetings, which is great because I could jump from one meeting to another meeting in the same night. And I know this year I'm going to be doing a lot more meetings. In fact, I'm probably going to be doing all these meetings. I'm trying to get our deputy superintendent trained up to do some of these meetings. She's not even here.
You want to be here, she just left the room.
She left for that
She's
little,
out doing a
that
meeting.
little clip, you need to
Yeah,
repeat.
she left the room.
That's perfect timing.
But this give the board a flavor, so you can start, if you will, start putting some of these things on your agenda.
Great.
So we're working through this and trying to get all those things finalized as we move forward. So that was it. Thank you for your indulgence.
Yeah, no worries. So there's no update in the construction project update?
So this is the referendum one. The new construction itself, just a quick little 5 minutes. In fact, we had.
Quick, dude.
No, it's gonna be quick, because you can start timing it. So today we had a meeting actually at the Sill, and I was pleased that today, the GC, the electrician, I think the HVAC, all those people were on site already. Because they had an initial project meeting last week, and so those folks are on site, they're gearing up, which is great, because all of a sudden it's like, wow, all these new people around, and already Barb told us that the elevator's gonna be shut down starting next week, and this is gonna be shut down. Augie and the project management team have a site already set up, so it's neat. It's neat to see this happening, and it's great to see, particularly GC, because GC's trying to drive the whole train, and that person being on site, ready with some crew to gear up on that piece of it. So as we get, Callie and her team are working on final work schedules, so we can have some sense of who's going to be doing what, when, and those kind of things. We'll share the information out to the board. The good thing is, it's kind of an implied piece. Now we can't hold them feet to the fire, but the expectation is that we will see substantial completion by May of '26. Already, people are thinking that it might be earlier than that, which is always a good thing. And the reason why we do May, because we want to have May, June, July, August for transition, and not having it being the day before Labor Day. So that's a good news that the major contractors are pretty excited. They're like, yeah, I think April, and they said April. I'm like, can we do March? You know, so but May was like the one that we had out there, kind of like, can we do May? Because then we know it's going to be a lot of transitional pieces. May of 20, not this May of 26.
Right.
So that's good. A lot of positive things, and at some point. Depends on construction. I would love to have the board go over again and see it, because some
I
of
would
you
love
probably
that.
haven't seen it, and probably last night said they completed. It's completely got it out now, just from our guys. So if it's still safe, we'll see, but not gonna bring in an unsafe situation.
Give us a couple of hard hats.
Yeah, that's what I
Get your
think.
names on it. So
Oh,
Vanessa,
There we go.
Green hard hat.
card hats with name on it.
Come on, green.
We do a tour.
Yeah.
We do a tour.
Put Miller
1:30.
on mine.
We do a 7:45.
It's Miller time.
7:45 tour of the building. See if I can get green hard hats with names on them.
Okay.
All right. So thank you.
That wasn't even 3 minutes,
Thank you.
Yeah.
just for the record.
Don't worry, we were telling
So,
I
I was
had a water
noticing.
bottle that was going to Buenos Aires.
Oh my.
Computer.
So I did not offer our students the chance to do
Oh.
announcements at the beginning, so thanks for sticking around. Maddie, do you have anything?
Yes. So recently our robotics team went on their field trip and a lot of the classes were watching it in school while they were going, so
Very
that was very
cool.
fun. I watched it in my transport class. The Model UN Club is going to New Jersey this weekend for a field trip for a conference, and that's really all I have. Oh wait, no, one more thing. The postcard program that we have done in previous years for free meals is going around the school right now, which is where students will sign a postcard writing a reason why we should have free meals. This goes along with like the previous stuff at the Senate and like I've done like within the past school year. So that's what we're currently doing. And then these postcards are being produced by the New York School Nutrition Association, and they're being passed out to like a bunch of schools in New York State, and then the New York SNA will pass them out like hand to hand to representatives for them to vote yes.
That is great. Thank you for your advocacy on that front. Do you have anything?
So currently Senate, we're working on the 75th anniversary, that whole event, so that's really, really big and we're really excited for it. Currently there are some committees, like one committee is looking at all the yearbooks, like from everything and trying to like organize all the photos. So that's really fun, there's crazy hair,
I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
yes, I'm sure the hair.
So we're doing that currently, and then last year we did Photo, which is Festival of the Arts, and we were really excited about that. But that's gonna be kind of like combined with the 75th anniversary, so there's gonna be like select groups performing like quartets and stuff. So yeah.
Thank you for your hard work on that. Okay, anybody else? Comments, questions?
For the good of the order?
Sure.
Oh, okay. No, I just wanted to share, and it was actually because Mrs., the principal of CODA, Mrs. Beckett, reached out to say that, she asked that I share this with the board, that next Wednesday, March the 26th from 6 to 8 p.m., there's going to be a CODA Cultural Cafe, and she had actually invited the middle school robotics program to that, but it's actually much bigger than robotics. It's families will be able to walk around the various groups, cultural food, fashion activities, talent show, music, CODA jazz band. So back students will prepare Mexican food, student council will serve ice cream, and we'll have our book fair going on, junior saga, cheer performance, color guard performance, art display, flags all around the world. It sounds really big. It's going to be in the CODA gym. I guess that's the interactive gym.
No,
No, that's not
Where
the
is that?
adaptive.
no, it's gonna be down the what we call it.
Green or
the
the
Oh,
white?
it's going to be in the green gym?
Yeah, the one that's walk, if you
No,
go
no,
Cody,
the white
walk down
gym
the
is
ramp
those-
and you make
That's the
That's the white gym.
That's the white gym, so it's the white
That's
gym.
what's gonna
Okay,
be.
so yes, that's what's going to be. And
So,
so she asked if I could make sure, let the board know, and she would love to come.
yeah, so just to jump off of that, so CODA partnership, they've been doing this for years. They change it up every year. So they've really expanded it. They've really been working hard on their DEI initiatives, and that's why they expanded much more into this year. A lot of kids that got involved with it, so it was really great with the parents' support. I'm glad that.
That's excellent.
It
Yeah,
sounds
they're
exciting,
doing
I'm
a
looking
good job
forward
with
to
that.
it. Of course, I responded back,
That's something
absolutely,
very
I will be there.
Thank you. Yeah, Gowanna did something similar, maybe not to that
Yeah.
degree, but like a month or two ago, and that worked out really well. Also, the middle school has a musical for the first time in several years. It's
Has a
actually
what?
Musical.
Oh, musical,
Yes,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
middle school's doing a musical this Friday and Saturday. Very exciting, 7, yeah.
Newsies Junior.
Oh, is that what it is, Newsies, yes. And I'm gonna be there, so
Okay,
you may all attend.
so
if you wish.
tickets at the door?
Yes,
and
tickets
is
at the
it-
door, yeah, they don't have the online stuff. Yes.
Okay.
Mary Colleen?
No, I was just saying, I think they're $5.
Oh, $5 per person, yeah.
What deal?
And it's all gonna go right back to the program, so. Does anyone else have anything? Is there?
Starving.
All right, well, we're gonna go eat, I guess. I will entertain a motion to adjourn for this evening. Naomi is first and Carla is second. All in favor? That would be 7 in favor, yeah. Okay, great.